Scribe always notices these things.
All right. So I assume that we all can see my screen.
Yep, that's
Yes.
good.
Awesome. All right. So on the screen, this page is the draft meeting agenda for today's meeting. So we have a number of agenda items that we will go through today. Around 7 of them. So hopefully within the hour and a half, we'll be able to get through all of them. So and I will put a link to today's meeting agenda into the chat if I can find chat.
As a matter of curiosity, what are the rules around quorum?
The quorum is usually a chair plus two international, but in patient care work group, we have made a deliberate decision to be chair plus three. So therefore, the number. Sorry, Lucy, did you say something?
I'm sorry, look, I unmuted before it's coughing instead of after coughing.
Okay. So that's kind of like the international convention for quorum. I think Greg, correct me if I'm wrong. I think we do follow
Yeah.
the international.
We have a localization. I was just looking it up. So we have
I think is that
specifically,
still chair plus three?
just checking, quorum. Oh, check this out. Quorum.
So we've got 3 organisations, CSIRO, HL7 Australia and Agency.
Oh
And
yeah.
Landon, so it's 4.
Yeah, I think it still says co-chair and 2 other group members.
Right. So therefore, it is I. Oh,
Yeah. And 2. Yeah. Yeah, that's the
Brett,
default
I am not
ones. Yeah.
able to put the link of
Oh,
the November the 5th. So can you put the link there? I put the link
yeah, I
on.
can.
Thank you. I put the link on about for today's meeting draft minutes on the chat. So if you can do that, that would be great.
Yep, will do.
All right. So today's draft meeting agenda is in the link to you guys. So if you want to peruse the draft meeting agenda on your own screen, please feel free to do so. But on the screen here is sort of a set of draft agenda, 7 of them. Is there any request for change or reordering the draft meeting agenda? All right, not hearing any, so we'll take this draft agenda as what we will go through today. All right, then Brett has sent through an email the draft meeting minutes for the meetings on the 11th, November the 5th, with the November the 19th meeting minutes still in progress. So I will slowly scroll through the meeting minutes. But the link, as I requested, Brett had put it in the chat. So again, you can peruse the meeting minutes at your own leisure. So with that, link available to you. And when I slow scroll through the screen here, are there any issues or any um, changes or amendment that is needed? All right, hearing none, can I have a motion to approve these meeting minutes?
Sure, Dave and Philip.
Thank you, David. Can I have a seconder?
I'll second Michael Osborne.
Thank you, Michael Osborne. So Brad, I know that in the HL7AU, by convention, we launch a e-vote to approve the minute, but internationally, we don't. So if we still want to do that, then
Yeah, let's do it.
okay.
I got it up. Yep, cool.
Yep.
Oh,
So
and I can't vote. I'm +1 affirmative for
okay,
me.
so we have 10 folks on the call, so we have 6 voted affirmative, and we have 2 abstain. So 6 plus 2
David
is
has
8
his hand
plus...
up for a question which might be relevant.
Okay, hang on. Let me sort of do the count first. Then, so we then plus Brett, we will have 7 affirmative, 2 abstain. That means that we have accounted for all numbers. David, do you have a question?
I just know that Rachel's only here till 10:30, and I thought there was a AU base thing where we'd put a ticket where we'd put in to have one of the AU base code systems looked at, and I'm just trying to figure out which one it was.
Okay.
Yeah.
Use that first.
No,
We
have to move it
we
around.
certainly can readjust the order of the agenda, and we should be able to do that. So we'll come back to that later. Thank you, David. But we've the next order of business, the approval of previous meeting minutes. We have 7 plus 2. That means that the motion to approve the meeting minutes is passed. Thank you. Okay, let's come back to the meeting agenda. Rachel, are you here?
I am here. Thank you.
Okay, thank
And
you.
yeah, apologies. Unfortunately, I can only stay on until 10:30. But I think the agenda item was
Number 6.
number
Yeah.
6.
Yeah.
Okay, number 6.
So we can prioritize that if everyone's happy. If
we can. I mean, in the interest of sort of a better flow of the meeting, why don't we do number 6 first, and then we can then come back to the rest of the meeting agenda in sequence. Would that work?
Yep.
Yep.
Thank
Okay,
you.
cool.
I'll allow my hand.
All right, I will open this one in a new link. Okay, so that's the one. Brett, do you want to start the conversation so that Rachel and the others can respond?
Yeah, I might throw it over the fence anyway. So this was raised through the agency. So David McKillop's raised it. So it was about on healthcare service. There is a value set applied there for service provision conditions. So that's actually we do have a binding already. It might be good. Do you want to click on the related URL there, Stephen? Yeah, and that'll guess that's the code system that we have. But you'll see if you click on the code system is used. Yep, there. Do you want to click on that one? So that's the value set, and then you should be able to click on AU-based healthcare service. There, and we can see where it's applied. So if you scroll down, we'll get it's bound. Scroll down to the tree. Service provision code as a binding to use that value set, and so through, I think Rachel or David can talk about this, but yeah, through PCA and other usage, there's an extra code to be considered adding. But with that, I think there were some questions about some of the existing code's meaning. Yeah.
So I think so David and the agency's clinical informatics team have brought this forward to you guys specifically for use in the Health Connect Australia provider directory FHIR IG, which they're working on right now. They have an information requirement to support this, to support service provision code or whatever that element's called, and a number of associated allowed values for that. That requirement is being informed directly by what PCA supports, because PCA will be initially the source that will be feeding that information about healthcare services from PCA into the Health Connect provider directory. And so currently in PC, and based on that, there's a number of codes from an information requirements perspective that the Health Connect Australia provider directory needs to support. Basically, there are a subset of these plus one additional code, which is not in this list. And that's what PCA currently supports. So we can have a look at what PCA supports if you guys are interested. But basically, where David's landed with this is that this additional code that PCA supports is called, we created it obviously just within the PCA FHIR IG, and our rationale for adding that into PCA was directly informed by a requirement that we got from the National Health Services Directory, so NHSD. So Health Director obviously are a integrating system with PCA, and data in PCA flows directly into the NHSD and is exposed via Service Finder. And they identified that there's an existing code. If you want to go back to the value set or the code list, Stephen, there's a code called FBB, fees and bulk billing, and that code and its definition were not deemed as appropriate and fulfilling the requirements that NHSD had. And so we like I said, we defined our own code in PCA based on input from NHSD, which we called mix. And if we can have a look at I can chuck a link in the chat to the PCA defined code. So in a nutshell, because that code is being supported by PCA, that is a requirement for the agency's Health Connect provider directory IG. And so that's where David's landed. Basically, we've got this special code, this mix code defined in PCA, and we're thinking about, can we actually get this defined as a proper national code, basically. And then, we saw this FBB and we're like, is it appropriate? And I think Brett, in discussions with you, the guys are like, actually, the definition of some of these is also a bit weird. And, it's not necessarily in scope of, the immediate need for a new code, but some of these existing code definitions may need some refining. But that's, just an additional thing. Like, for example, the FAP, fees apply, the definition here just does not even make sense. All or some of the services provided are offered at the healthcare service. It's just, I think it's almost like a typo or something with the definition of that one. So, I guess as a part of, looking at this code system and, this requirement for a new code for mix, I think, we just had a few questions about some of these existing codes as well. But that's it in a nutshell. I don't know, David, if there's anything else you wanted to add, or Richard, sorry.
No, the only
Richard
other
had your
thing
hand
was
up.
BBO is, the the display doesn't quite match the definition. The
Yes, yeah, you're
definition
right.
probably
That's
should
another
have
one
bulk
that's
billing
not
only, you
clear.
know.
Yeah,
So there's just a few things to tidy up.
Yeah.
So I see that
There's a
as
bit
two
of
things.
there's
Number
a bit
one
of
is a new code to be added. The other thing is to update the definitions. So, but before we get into that, Richard have your hand up, and also Brett has his hand up. So we'll go to Richard first.
Okay. Now, FBB, what we have here is a bit confused. It's possible that we could clarify the meaning of FBB in such a way that it would be synonymous with MIX, the new code that Rachel was talking about. It's possible that we could clarify FBB so that it's distinct from MIX, in which case everything's lovely, or we could clarify it so that it overlaps, in which case we still want mix. But if we clarify FBB and find that what it is meant to mean is the same as this code that Rachel's proposing, MIX, we then find ourselves in the position of having two codes, and we will have to decide whether to not use MIX or whether to deprecate FBB and adopt MIX, or whether to or what to do. But until we know what FBB means, there's a
yeah.
very real possibility. There's a very real possibility that FBB means exactly what this new code that Rachel needs is, but we can't answer that until we know what FBB means.
Okay, Brett.
Yeah, it got like I think a number of these terms are not well defined. But the way I read FBB and what bulk billing is, um, it kind of implies that some items are bulk billed and some items are fee paying. And I think that's a little different than mixed, which is like conditional bulk billing. Um,
Can you just clarify what
yeah.
you mean by items, Brett, as well? Because this is the
Oh,
other
like
issue we had, where it says all or
MBS
some
item.
of the services, noting that
Yeah.
this is against a healthcare service. I think Richard and David and I thought that what this is actually saying when it says all or some of the services, it's actually talking about all or some of the
Oh, well, I think it's kind
instances
of
of this service provided,
nah,
almost.
because I think of that as more like the billable services. So, because every like it's like bulk billing is MBS items and any other fee paying items.
Yeah.
There can be private items,
Yeah.
in the
So you
fee
have
schedule. Yeah.
I mean,
multiple NBS items, obviously within a
yeah,
particular
yeah,
service,
yeah,
healthcare
Yeah.
service.
yeah,
So the
Yeah.
term services here again is kind of confusing.
Yeah,
If
yeah.
that's
it
what you
is.
believe this is referring to, yeah.
So
Yeah,
it
but
wasn't
yeah.
clear whether, for instance, say we paint toenails and there's an item for that. Now, a possibility is that, painting toenails and trimming toenails are two different services. So I might charge for one and bulk bill for the other. Straightforward. Another possibility is that when it comes to trimming toenails, some people I bulk bill and some people I charge for. Now, the thing being that they're two different situations of saying that I do different things with services. One is I do different things with different class of services, and the other one is I do different things with different instances of providing a service. And it wasn't clear how these definitions were meant to be, how
It's
the
very
word
common.
service is meant in that.
Yeah, it's very common in GP practice to have conditional bulk billing. That's very common. And it's very common to also have private fee schedules for items that are not MBS items.
Yeah,
It's also common to have copay where you have a private fee on top of
yeah.
Medicare claimable.
But
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 yeah,
and I
yeah.
guess that's done on a per patient basis. So when it
Yeah,
comes
usually
to, for
there's
instance, toenail
criteria.
trimming, some patients I charge, some
Yeah.
patients I bulk bill.
Often, yeah, like in GP land, like commonly, like children often get bulk billed for their items, even though they're the same item as an adult, right? And that's pretty typical. Or if that people do selectively choose it based on income and whatever. Right? So it's up to the doc to decide if they're going to charge the private part of the.
All right, Heath, you have your
Yeah,
hand up.
yeah.
Yeah, I am just investigating where this is being used at the moment. I can see it's a whole new concept of service provision conditions and stuff like that. But these concepts that we're talking about sound like an overlap with coverage types as well. So I know, and I don't want to, probably the horse has bolted already, but it just seems like we've got a bit of an overlap of things, and perhaps there is a separate use case here but there does seem to be similar, uh, you know, they lead to um, a coverage type or something rather, the service provision conditions or something rather. But yeah, I'm struggling a little bit with this list and how it relates to coverage types, I guess, in general.
I think of coverage as being about who do I work with. So I work with kids, I work with adolescents, I work with adults, I work with people who've got all their toes. And so they might be coverage types. And then provision is I charge them, I don't charge them, I do it for free, I get money
But
from
that's not
Medicare.
how coverage type is defined, Richard. That we actually have things like it's Medicare, like it's literally insurance.
Yeah,
Who's going to pay for this? Is it
it's
bulk
financial.
billed? Is it whatever? And so it's not necessarily who the individual is, it's the classification of whether it's private insurance or whether it's
It's insurance
motor
coverage type.
accident, all
Okay.
those sorts of things. But you can see where I'm struggling a little bit around the overlap here. I know it's not a direct overlap, but things like bulk billing is an overlap with bulk billing. Um, so yeah,
Um,
and there's stuff around co-payments and discounts and all those sorts of
It,
things.
Is
yeah,
coverage type an attribute of healthcare service? Where's coverage type used?
It's
coverage, yeah,
associated with
separate.
an encounter or a request.
Yeah,
It's
yeah, it's a
more of an
separate thing
encounter.
because you have a coverage for whatever, right? So Medicare, like having a Medicare card is coverage, right? That's like one of the things. So, but like I can tell you where these came from. These originally NHSD. It's interesting because they actually wrote these. The NHSD wrote these in the first place, and they were submitted way back in an early version of AU Base. And they're really classifications. They're financial. It's like a financial classification for the service provider to let people select which service provider to attend. So they're really more generalized indications of how you will be billed. So it's, there are bulk billing clinics that are strictly bulk billing, and so there won't be any other things happening there. So they want to be able to identify those separately from others that have private fee schedules or just completely private payment. So it's really to help select that. So it's not specifically under any scheme. It's more of just a selection criteria about how it's so people can choose a service that's appropriate for their financial situation. Yeah.
So in the interest of time, there are three things that we are discussing. Number one is a new code, and number two is the
Could,
overlap between the new code and some of
could
the existing codes, and also
yeah,
actually there are four things, and also number three is some of the definitions of this code is
I
sort of needs to be improved, and then the fourth one is the overlap of this one with the coverage. So we have
yeah.
four issues here to be addressed.
I think the only issue for me, like what's in the ticket, is do we need a new mix code or not, and is it the same as FBB or not, and does the FBB words need to be clarified? Because if we think mix is the same as FBB, then we just say, well, we need the right words in FBB. But if we think it's different, I think we add a new code and then come back for the rewordings later.
Okay,
Yeah.
so
Yeah,
so
yeah,
so so the issue at hand is whether or not we need a new code, or whether or not that
yeah.
new code overlap with the existing codes and definitions. And then there's still the issue of what Heath raised as to be overlapping of this code set with the coverage. So that still needs to be addressed, but we can address it separately if that's okay with you, Heath.
Yeah, that's fine. I
Uh,
I mean, my advice I think is don't get too elaborate here because I think again this is going to be consumer facing. So how are they going to be able
Yeah.
to distinguish between these?
Yep, that's it. And look, so if based on what you were saying, Brett, that these codes were originally defined by NHST,
Yeah.
They've now changed their mind about, which is funny. So they defined
Yeah,
the FBB code, but now, like I'm trying to look when we made this change back to mix. It was at the start of 2024 actually is when they said, no, we don't want to use FBB. We want to create a new code. We're going to call it mix. And here's our definition. And from that point forward, PCA supported it as well. So I think there's probably, I think there's a good case for adding mix to meet immediate needs of obviously PCA, NHSD, and the Health Connect directory, with a note that as an additional piece of work, we may want to possibly deprecate FBB if we believe that it's now covered by our new mix code. But adding the new code right now, I feel, is, a relatively low risk thing. And at some point in the future, we can look to whether FBB actually is still appropriate, if it's being used by anyone, if it can now be kind of subsumed by our new mix code with a better definition. I don't know. That would be my preference.
I think the decision is difficult because the FBB wording is so unclear. Because because in combination with bulk billing, like it doesn't make sense because like bulk billing is bulk billing and there's no fees attached to the bulk billing payment, right? If you're under bulk billing, you're getting charged MBS, right? And that's how it goes. In fact, you're not getting charged at all. It's going to be billed through Medicare direct by the clinic.
So how is mix different to the co-payment?
So mix is conditional. Like I get the conditional. See the whole thing, like fees may apply. Like I think like I don't think I'm not sure that's even making sense because like conditional, like you're either under conditional
I think maybe
bulk billing
somebody
or
needs to go back to
under a co-payment scheme.
So
Yeah.
given that the codes came from given that NHSD wrote the codes, NHD seems are the source of most of the use of the codes. We should have a conversation with NHSD about what do they think the codes mean and which codes they have previously used and which codes they currently use. And then we'll be in a position to know whether what to do with FBB. But I think we need that conversation with NHSD first.
Yeah.
Well, NHSD is only using a subset of these. They're using NFE, BBO, and FAP. That's all they're currently using. The other codes they don't use. So straight away we know that that's their current position. However long ago they created these, they've since obviously decided that they're not applicable to them. They may still be applicable to others who use them, but
okay. So they use NFE and BBO, you said.
Yeah, and FAP.
And FAP. Okay,
and their new mix MIX code.
Right.
Yep.
Okay. Right.
So
two of those have got reasonable definitions, and one has a nonsense definition. Okay. Right.
So, in the interest of time, I don't want to be seen as to be guillotining the conversation, but I think we do need to make a decision as to how to move forward with this Jira ticket. So, what is the proposition here that we are, in general, comfortable to move forward on?
Yeah, well, I guess the big question is whether you guys are comfortable with adding a new code independent of reviewing the contents and the definitions and all the rest and the actual included codes in this code system, or whether you want to do that. You're not just going to add a code by itself. You need to actually add the code in conjunction with a full review of all of the other codes in the code system.
So yeah, I heard you mention. Sorry, Rachel, I heard you mention earlier that adding a new code appears to be low risk, but given the probability of causing confusion, the risk might be a bit higher than low risk. So would the motion in that case be adding a new code, but we have to add it in the context of reviewing existing codes in order for that to progress? Would that be a position that you are comfortable to take forward with?
Sorry, Stephen. I was multitasking then, sorry.
So I'm just saying that given that you earlier mentioned that adding a new code appears to be low risk, but in the context of the probability of overlap and confusion, the risk might actually be a bit higher than low risk. So my question is that in terms of resolution of this ticket, are we comfortable to make a motion of adding a new code, but at the same time reviewing the overlap and resolve the overlap as a complete ticket, or do we want to separate them into two?
Well, that's up to you guys. What does everyone on the call think? Do you want to, do it as a single activity?
I think it needs a review, but like I'm happy. Like I think I'm just not sure about the definition of mixed code either at this point, because it's like I'm not sure that's clear enough.
So we can entertain a motion of adding a new code, but conditional on the disambiguations of the definitions and also resolving any overlap. So that can be a conditional kind of motion.
Should we resolve to like rework this whole set and bring it back with improved wordings?
Or we can
decide.
Or we can decide to rework this code set in the context of the propose new code with definition, and then come back at the next meeting to address that. Rachel, are you comfortable with that?
I'm comfortable with whatever approach everyone.
So is there a time pressure to get this done? So therefore we can't wait to come back, or time pressure is not an issue. We can wait to come back.
I don't think so. Like Richard and David, like for now, we can just create a placeholder code, right? Our own code in the provider directory FHIR. I think that's I don't think it's I'm not working on that project, so I don't want to speak for the guys, but I don't think it's a super time sensitive thing.
I think we want to do better than that. We don't want to be having implementations against an interim code when we can probably progress this relatively efficiently.
Oh, I don't think we're anywhere near implementations using a local code. I think it's more just a placeholder in that IG during the kind of community consultation process.
Michael Wilson, your hand is up.
I think this is an ongoing problem we're having with code systems and having them in AU based, is that trying to get them right and get them right first time in AU based is difficult. Looking at all the problems we had when e-requesting with this same process and then having to change them after we put them in, I think that approach of actually having them in the downstream IG as temporary codes works well, and that's the way they do it internationally. Until you get above AFMM2, they stay in the downstream IG as a temporary code. Then once they've matured, then you move them into THO. And I think when we're looking at this process moving forward, that actually might work better for us. So we've got flexibility to implement refine in a downstream IG and then push them into AU base or THO or whatever we're doing.
So Michael, are you suggesting that we don't need to deal with this ticket for now until we have downstream implementation?
I'm just saying that we don't necessarily have to rush it. I think that trying to rush it in actually potentially creates more problems Because we
Yeah,
did an e-request,
it
we put them
hasn't.
in, we got it wrong, and then we had to go back and change it and the like,
Yeah,
and that
but
would have
this
been
is
better done in the downstream IG.
these codes have been in for more than 5 years in AU base, right? So these are not new. Um, yeah, so
Um,
it's like we have to host the work somewhere, and like NHSD picked them up and supplied them originally way
all
back,
right,
and then that
I
was
will.
also discussed in the provider directory project for
Yeah,
the original
I would
HL7
like to wrap
provider
up this
project.
conversation in the next 5 minutes
Yeah,
or so, if I can.
yeah,
So I
yeah.
have Richard's hands up, and then we go to Heath, and then I want to see a proposal or a motion going forward.
Um,
Richard.
and okay, part of the problem with codes like mix is not so much that whether they're in a downstream IG or whether they're in an AU base IG, but it's the identification of the code system. And so you want one of the things is at the moment it's going to be in it's going to the system, the code system ID is going to be an extension code system ID. It's not going to be part of where it's going to wind up. So at some stage, there'll be a change of the code because the code is going to be a code in one code system is going to be replaced by a code in another code system or supplanted by a code in another system. So that sort of stuff makes, I think, that winds up complicating timing on doing these things. That was all.
I think we have a solution for that, Richard. We've been talking with the CI guys around that internally within the agency as a part of this Foundation FHIR framework stuff we're working on. So we can chat offline around how we deal with those scenarios to avoid the exact issue that you're talking about. But yeah, look, okay, well, I would like to propose a motion that
Sorry,
we...
I'm Rachel. I
Sorry,
see Heath's hands up first. We'll get hear from Heath, and then I'm happy for you then to move forward with a motion.
Thanks, Stephen. Just following on from what Michael said, I actually think it's a pretty pragmatic suggestion. But on the other hand, this IG that we're talking about is coming through an AFCP sort of process. So my concern, it goes back to what I said before, is that it becomes a code that actually gets implemented and actually never gets realigned back into AU base if we do that because of this particular process. In the case of e-requesting, I think that we've got more control over that, but in this particular case, it struggles. So I'm a little bit in two minds around it. But I do hear what Michael was saying, and I think it's actually a pretty pragmatic approach in general.
Yeah, I just put it in the chat, the actual wording from it, which is about trying to flag it very much as temporary, that it is very much needs to be indicated this is temporary, it will change, it will get moved. But yeah, I mean, we obviously need to mature our process around this, but to me, it makes a lot of sense.
But here's
the
a good
difference
opportunity for us to do that.
These are in use. These are already in use in the
No, about the
NHSD
new,
spec
about adding a
today.
new code. Like we don't
Yeah.
have to put the new code in here now. We can put the new code in a temporary code system. Why we review this, why we do all this process to do this, and then bring it in rather than potentially trying to push it in today. That's
Yeah, I
just all
agree,
the
Michael.
suggestion is.
But can we move that? Can we put that forward as a motion to? So the scope of the original ticket that David raised shall be expanded to cover a review of the code system as a whole to determine whether or not we actually even need this new mix code or not. And in the meantime, for the purposes of the Health Connect provider directory, they will do, like Michael said, we'll have a temporary code for mix in the meantime, and that can be managed with any very, very early implementers who might look at using it prior to us.
Rachel, are you happy to put your motion into the chat? So therefore, we sort of have a solid documentation for, I think, Ducey, who is capturing the meeting note, so that she doesn't have to go back to the listening to the recording.
Service provision code system as a whole, including possible inclusion of new MIDX code. Okay, motion. Review service provision code system as a whole, including possible inclusion of new mixed code.
So
Is
is that in the
everyone
chat?
happy with that? I'm just about to post it, but I want to make sure everyone's happy with that wording before I post it.
I was going, Brett's got his hand up, but I was going to a friendly amendment around including the value set, because I think if we can refine that value set down to what I think is a usable set and
Yes,
starting to
good point.
indicate the ones that are
Actually used,
potentially
yeah,
deprecated.
excellent. Yeah, good idea. Yeah. So review service provision code system and value set as a whole. Yeah. Cool.
All right. So we have this in the chat. I shrink it down so therefore we only see the motion. Brett, do you have a friendly amendment or?
No, I have questions. That's all.
Okay.
I like who is going to do the review?
Ruben, you
and
have your hand
why
up.
are we wouldn't restrict value sets in AU base. If we think a code shouldn't be there, we should just deprecate it. We wouldn't restrict value sets in AU base because we don't have a specific use case. So if the code is no good, we should get rid of it.
We
Yeah,
could have a
what do you
value
do?
set that is a subset of the code system.
All right, from a procedural perspective, I would like to have the motion first, and then we can then open up for further discussions and see whether or not there will be a need for modifying the motion. So, Brett, can you wait a bit for the discussion? Thanks. Ruben?
Yeah, mine is suggesting a friendly amendment, and that is, can we indicate what the time frame, well, not time frame, but following this review, and presumably there's some changes to the code system, whether that's going into this next release of AU Base or if it's a future release of AU Base.
Next release being February.
It's not going into the R6. It's not going into the R600 release because it's not in ballot.
Okay, so then it's the next one.
Next
it's the
release,
next one.
is that February? Yeah, sorry.
Yeah. Okay then.
There'll be a ballot. Yeah, that's the intent to ballot to support this kind of stuff.
Yeah, so in that case, then next release post next ballot. Is that right?
Yeah. We'll talk about the intent to ballot stuff, but yeah, there's an intention to do a ballot in the February-March period for a 6.1 to include changes needed for downstream IGs.
Yeah. So that's that's post-February. Yep. All right. Okay, then we have the motion on the table. Before I move into getting a second, let's open it up for discussion first. If we need to modify it, then I don't have to ask I second this I consent. So, Brett?
Oh, could I just check the wording? So it won't the release that the next release is in January for the R6000 600 release. So the ballot period will be in February for a 6.1, and then reconciliation will happen after that. So it'll be after.
So just change February to 6.1. Is that what you're suggesting, Brent?
Well, we haven't agreed to do a 6.1 yet. That's later in the meeting.
Yeah, so that's
but
what
yeah.
So that's what I said earlier. That's what I said earlier. Post February, really.
Okay, so for inclusion in next ballot of AU base. How's that?
Yeah, that's great.
That generic enough? Yep.
Perfect.
Okay, yeah, that's good. Yep.
Ruben?
Look, this is not something we have to deal with now, but as part of the proposal for 6.1, there is a decision that may impact this motion. I'm just flagging that now. And that decision is whether we choose to create a HL7 Australia terminology FHIR IG into which all the terminology artifacts will go. That's been suggested before, and it's, I think, going to be discussed if we get to scoping for 6.1. So I'm just flagging that possibility because that work would then happen as part of, sorry, the proposed motion, the work there would then happen within that IG.
The proposed motion doesn't say 6.1. The proposed motion is for
It does
inclusion in
say,
the next period.
Whether
it says it AU
whether
based though. That's my point, Stephen. It might not be in AU based that these artifacts reside.
Lucy, you have your hand up?
Yes, I was just wondering, do we need a motion for this? Because this to me sounds as an action that needs to be assigned to someone. So
Yes,
I'm not really sure
Yeah,
So the
I think it's just
if
an
motion
we
action.
really do need a motion, or is this just an action for someone to review and bring it back to the group?
Yeah,
is
I think we
the
just say
motion
who and
and
when.
Lucy to close the ticket that David raised then? Because David's
I don't-
ticket was create a new code, I think.
Well, I think it's still pending.
Yeah, I think that's
So the
still
ticket's
open.
not
Yeah.
closed. It's still in
Yeah.
progress. It's being triaged effectively through this process.
Yeah,
Okay.
I think I
yes,
think
I
this would
think-
be good as an action. Yeah, if
Yeah,
we
so the
but, and
ticket
that's what
can-
I would like to identify who
Yeah,
is going
the
to do this.
ticket can stand, and Lucy has made a valid point as to I frame this one as an action item rather than a motion. So we'll change this from the motion to an action item.
So it's
Sounds
really an action to come up with a resolution that we can then vote on.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, I would like if I would like to suggest if the HCA PD project can get PCA and NHSD to really feed into what they need, right? I think that will kind of land us in the right place because they're the ones with the use case, right?
Agree.
At this point. So
who else would we need to engage with though, Brett? To if we're suggesting changes to these codes and their definitions, presumably we need to engage with more than just PCA and NHSD.
yeah, I mean they're going to go through ballot as well, but it's like I'm not sure who else would be looking at these because like it came from the NHSD to start with, and it is a provider directory kind of selection criteria question. So I don't know who else
Okay, well we'll just
is
make a
in the
note.
space. Yeah, yeah.
We'll make
we
a
don't
note.
have like active projects. Yeah, we don't have anyone doing that work. Yeah.
All right. So in that case, then, Lucy, do you have the action item captured, or do you need it to be stated in the chat for your record?
I think what I captured is just to review service provision code system and definitions in the context of whether this new code is needed or not. Is that sufficient, or do I need to record anything else?
Could we put somebody's name or
And yes,
the people's name on it?
that's
Yeah.
what I was going to ask, who the action is assigned to, and if we have any timeframes.
That person can invite others to participate in the process.
Yeah.
Yep. So Richard and David and Rachel, any one of you wants to take this one up?
Yeah, it'll be a Richard or a David
Okay.
name against it. I'll obviously be assisting them, but yeah, I'm not officially working this stuff. So yeah.
So Richard or David, anyone
Sure,
who...
put my name against it. I know Jack all people from the HSNSD.
Okay, all good.
But I can
So
yeah,
dumb
David,
questions.
if you can put your name against it, David, and then reach out to me and I'll help you coordinate with NHSD.
And David, I'm very happy to sit in the meeting too, because
Yeah,
I got some
definitely. Good
background.
idea.
Yeah, I got some background because it's in the original HL7 PD spec as well.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Okay.
all right, all good. And then
sadly.
in that case, then time frame. Do we want to have the ability to report back at the next meeting, or do we need to defer it until the new year?
I think it can be deferred until the new year.
Okay. So the
Just
second
based on
meeting.
people's availability and the scope of the work required, it's not going to happen before the next meeting.
So do we want to put tentatively a timeline for reporting back at the second meeting in the new year?
Sounds good.
All right.
Yeah, we have to get on to it pretty quick because we've got to get content in for the ballot period if we want it published
Yeah,
right.
so
Yeah.
I have to
that
act on
means,
upon it this week and next week because the week after that I'm off for 5 weeks.
yeah, that's the reason why I'm suggesting that
Well,
we
David, you
want
can
to,
hand it over to Richard and others.
yeah.
It's not going to be just you doing the work. So, yep, I think we'll make it work.
So let's sort of like tentatively put the reporting time back as to the second meeting in the new year.
Sounds good. I'm afraid I have to drop off.
All right, thank
So,
you, Rachel.
yeah,
Thanks, Rachel.
I'll wait to hear from you, David, Richard, around helping you guys to progress this work, and we'll involve Brett, and obviously I've got contacts at NHSE to assist us as well. Cool. Thanks,
All
everyone.
right.
Thanks,
Right.
Thank you, Rachel.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. So it takes up a fair bit of our time today. So that means that we have only about 35 minutes left for the rest. Brett, in that case,
we really got to do number 3.
we really got to do number 3. So, all right, let's do number 3 first.
Okay, that'll be me. Stephen, do you mind if I grab the screen?
Sure.
Please?
Yep. I'll
I
stop
think it's easier
sharing. You
if I share.
can
Yeah,
take over. Yep.
thank
Oh,
you.
Stephen, can I also flag we really need to do number 4 as well because that was a deadline for the
Yep.
notice of
Hopefully,
intent for
I
the
will
ballot
do
as
number
well.
3 and
Otherwise,
number
we'll have to work it
4,
out.
and hopefully, if we have time, we do a bit more. Otherwise, we might have to wrap up the meeting today, and then defer the other items to the 17th. All right, Lucy, go ahead.
All right. I think I'm sharing the right screen. So
Yep.
this is the patient
Okay.
summary.
Yep, got your screen.
Patient summary implementation guide. So I'll just make this a little bit bigger. All right. So this is for patient summary. The TDG endorsed the FMM1 for all artifacts last Friday, subject to FHIR group approval, of course. So today I'd like to walk through the QA report. And I think I'll focus on errors and warnings that haven't been accepted by this group previously and hopefully explain why they're acceptable. And then I'll ask the group to endorse the FMM1 levels for all patient summary artifacts. So I'll just go to the QA report. Can everyone see that?
Yep.
I can.
All right. Okay. I'll scroll down. So these are examples. We'll just ignore that, and I'll get back to this error on the IG later. I just want to go through the artifacts first. All right. So the first one here in the list is the bundle. So if I go there, all right. So the tooling reports one error on bundle related to bundle.entry mismatch on slicing rules. The cause of this is IPS and AUPS slicing bundle.entry differently. So the IPS slices by type and profile, which allows multiple entries of the same resource type, including the profiles that are not IPS profiles. AUPS slices by type only and requires each entry to conform to the AUPS profiles for that type. So we are stricter by design, and this is intentional. This is design that has been confirmed by the group because we want all profiles to be compliant with AUPS. So yeah, this difference is intentional, and the groups accepted this error as an approved exception last Friday. Are there any questions about this one before I move on to the next one?
How does demanding that things comply more strictly throw an error from a profile that is more relaxed?
Because the tooling is matching slicing and discriminators and is looking for the exact match. And if it's not the exact match, it then reports an error.
Oops,
So
sorry,
it's
I was on
looking,
mute. Is that a tooling limitation?
it is the tooling, yes. So it
Okay.
is the tooling. Yeah, the tooling is looking because this discriminator
All right. Okay.
is found on the IPS profile, but it's not in the AUPS profile. And because it's not found on the AUPS, the tooling is reporting an error.
Right. So this winds up being, in fact, valid work. It's just that it's a tooling.
Yes.
Okay. Is the
Yeah.
tooling expected to be upgraded at any stage to support this?
Oh, the tooling's changing all the time. Graham's
Okay,
done a
enough
number of
said.
changes, and we've been testing some of his changes. And I think he goes through periods where he does more work on this, where the time allows, and then it
Maybe
sort of
someday it will
stops. And
support this.
yeah.
Okay, thank you. No more questions.
All right. Okay. Anyone else before I move on to the next one? Okay. All right. So the composition has a number of warnings related to pinning that's already been discussed and accepted by these groups. So I'm just going to skip those. All right. For the patient summary condition, we are getting one warning that's related to condition.category value set. So it says that the value set that's used in the EU patient summary include codes that are not allowed in the claim profile, which is the IPS profile. So the reason for this is bindings we use and the value set actually we use in AUPS and IPS. So AUPS extends the IPS value set with the encounter diagnosis to support local workflows. This concept is not in the IPS. IPS permits problem list only. This is okay because both bindings, in both IPS and AUPS, are extensible. So using an additional concept outside of the IPS is allowed. Again, this is intentional design. This has been discussed and agreed by the group to have this binding in AU patient summary. And again, the groups accepted this warning as an approved exception. Any questions on this one? All right. Next one. Diagnostic, AUPS pathology result observation profile has a number of warnings on SPIA value set, which have also been discussed and accepted by this group. So I'm not going to talk about those now. We can, if there are any questions related to this, if time allows, we can go through those at the end. But I'll just focus on the new warnings and errors now. All right, so we are getting errors or error on this profile. It says it doesn't comply with the claim profile, with the IPS profile for a number of reasons. So we are getting 3 errors actually related to observation invariance, observation.category, and observation.value. So the first 2 are actually related to invariance. So IPS and AUPS enforce the same rules, but the invariants are different and the FHIR parts are different. So the tool can't really match them, can't line them up, and then flags them as missing. The next one is the observation.category, where it says that discriminator value wasn't found. So this is again design difference between IPS and AUPS. IPS uses a value pattern discriminator. AUPS inherits from AU core code and system discriminate on coded system. So the tooling again can't match these and reports this as an error or a mismatch. And then the last one is related to observation.value X, where it says it can't find a slice for value string and value quantity. So this is down to differences again, where IPS must support on 3 specific data type slices. So it has slices for value quantity, value string, and value codable concept. AUPS sets must support on the choice element itself, on the value X, meaning that it applies to all data types. So the tooling looks for the IPS style slices and reports them as missing because it can't find them. So these are all really modeling differences, not content defects. And these profiles are compatible functionally. Again, this has been accepted by a core group for as accepted exception in AUPS. Any questions or comments on this one? No? All right, let's go to the next one. So medication request related to pinning, we'll just skip that. And then there is an error on medication statement where it says that reason reference element, the IPS targets different profile. The reason reference target diagnostic report IPS is reported as not valid constraint. So this is because AU patient summary medication statement profile derives from a core medication statement, which allows reason reference to AU core condition, observation, and AU-based diagnostic report. AU patient summary then adds IPS diagnostic report profile is a allowed target reference to meet the IPS compatibility requirements. So the tooling can't resolve this cross-IG constraint relationship to confirm that the IPS diagnostic report profile is a valid constraint and flags this as an error. So again, this is a known tooling limitation. I know the Graham started some work on this to allow cross-IG relationship validation, but I don't think that's in place yet. So that's why we're getting this error now. Again, it's a known tooling limitation, not a content error. And based on this, it's been accepted as an approved exception by the group. Any questions on this one? No? All right. So patient pinning, we're just skipping through, all right, and we have one error on the patient that says it doesn't comply with the claimed profile, patient IPS, because there is a mismatch in slicing at patient gender identity. So this has been confirmed as an IPS issue because the IPS has an internal dependency on a ballot version of the extension spec, which then causes some issues for all downstream IGs that have dependency on the IPS. They confirmed they're planning to issue 201 errata to fix this for all downstream IGs. There's nothing for us to do. Gender identity and personal pronoun slices are there in both AUPS and IPS, so we just have to wait for that IPS errata release to be published so this error goes away. Any questions about this one? All right. So just skipping through these that are related to pinning, and the last one is on patient summary smoking status, where again it says that our profile doesn't comply with the IPS profile due to the error on observation code where it can't match the pattern. So in IPS, the observation code is fixed to a single line code. In AUPS, we inherit this from AU core actually. The same element, it has two codings, one for SNOMED CT and one for LOINC. And the other difference is that SNOMED is listed, SNOMED coding is listed first and LOINC is listed second. So the tooling checks these literally and flags a difference because AUPS has an extra coding and a different order. The meaning is still the same. Both represent the same concept, smoking status. So it's really just modeling difference, not an issue with the profile or the content in any way. So again, the groups accepted this as approved exception. Any questions or comments about this one? No? All right. Okay. I'll go up to that last error that was showing on IG. This one here. No definition could be found for the exception expansion parameters. So this is caused by tooling, right? It's been confirmed. There is a link here to the Zulip chat where Graham actually confirmed that this started happening and he didn't know when he would be able to resolve this. So it's just going to be there for a while. There is nothing for us to do, and it's not an issue for the implementation guide or any of the artifacts in the implementation guide. So I think that's it for the errors and warnings. So each item is either it's either a tooling limitation or is an accepted design difference between AUPS and IPS where functionally these still remain compliant. Are there any questions or comments before I make a motion to accept these errors and warnings as exceptions and endorse AFMM1?
All right, hearing none.
All
I
right.
think it was safe to make a motion, Ducey.
All right. I'll motion that the group endorses AFMM1 for all listed patient summary artifacts, accepting these documented exceptions as noted.
All right, any seconder?
I'm happy to second Landon Riley.
Thank you,
Thanks,
Landon.
Landon.
So we have a motion on the table. We have a second. Any further discussions or questions to Ducey? All right, hearing none, we are ready to vote for the motion. Brett, can you please launch the electronic polling? Thank you.
There you go.
So we have 11 still in the participation. I have 7 voted. Affirmative. Brett, are you a +1?
Yes, please. Thank you.
Okay. And there is 1 abstain. I think that we can confidently say that the motion is carried. So for recording purposes, to see there is 8 affirmative and 1 abstain.
All right.
You got that?
Thank you.
Yep. Thank
Thanks.
you. All right.
Thank you. I will stop sharing now.
Okay, thanks. There is actually another IPS item which is sort of number 5. Is that a quick one, or is it time sensitive that we need to resolve it today, or can it wait? Lucy?
That one is actually what that Heath was going to present, but Heath, did you want to talk about that?
Okay. So Heath, is that time sensitive? Because I'm mindful that there's only about 15 minutes left, and Brett needs to handle item number 4. And if that's not time sensitive, can that wait until next meeting?
Yeah, as long as we're, I guess, got a decision for the next ballot, I think, Brett, that's
Yeah.
where we'll land anyway. So I
Exactly.
think probably if
Yep.
we can do it before Christmas, so we've got lead time to
Yep.
get it into the ballot, that should be sufficient.
All
Yeah,
good.
I think we've
So
got one more
we will
call.
be able to come back at the next meeting, which is December the 17th. So I think
Yeah,
we can
that's the last
then
one.
park
Yeah.
this item for now. We will go to number 4. Brett is
Yeah.
My only caveat would
Project.
be if there is a couple of minutes, it would be nice to perhaps progress something
Yeah.
in the meantime.
okay. Let's
Yeah.
sort of like sort of play by ear. So Brett, are you going to share screen?
I
Okay.
hopefully have.
All right. Cool.
Cool. Yeah. So I'll just try. I might break this into two parts because um I think there's an apparent need that we need to go to ballot again in February, March ballot period, mainly to handle downstream IG requirements. So it's that item for AUPS is one of them, to help flesh out some detail. And we also have some stuff coming through from the AFCP project, the Health Connect Australia Provider Directory as well, with some new artifacts to be considered. Yeah, so this is just an intent to ballot in that period. So in the February, March period, in that ballot cycle, the intent to ballots have been made earlier to try and get sign-ups for that period because it's early in the year. So yeah, so this was just a request to at least list 6.1 release, which is essentially a continuation of the R6 sequence, and it will have a limited scope in addressing only things that are only inclusions for downstream IG requirements, and also any technical corrections that we have, like if there's actually faults in the R6 release that we need to deal with. Ruben also wanted me to note that if there is a THO project, that could form part of it as well, but we probably need to have that exist and be active before that becomes relevant. The idea here is it would be a very limited set of things that would come in, and we would by default defer other issues raised through that ballot period into the R7 work, and we would continue on with R7 kind of scoping and development after that. So just to do a notice of intent to ballot, it's not very exciting. It just says we're intending to look at a particular ballot cycle. We've got a release number. Um, it would be a superseding of 6.0, but it would only have additions, so we expect it to be backwards compatible. And we would need to look at maturity models for the new things coming in as well. So we have some questions there to answer. But the idea is here it would support um, support the new IG content. Yep. So
So an
yeah,
idea with this is you could have very targeted review that 90% of it would not be in any way changed other than header and footer material, and that there'd only be a very small number of
new artifacts,
easily
or change.
identifiable items that had any change other than header and footer. Okay.
Yeah, we probably, like, for this release, we would probably even indicate that with Stu notes and through the ballot, and it'd say, look here for this material. So yeah, the idea is it's pretty focused and wouldn't really be expanding the scope of things we're doing at the moment.
So from the scoping perspective, Brett, does it preclude anyone who want to make comment on what has already been balloted this year?
I mean, we always invite comments, but I think it's just in the triage of those, I think we would want to have a criteria that, unless it was a fault, we would defer that until R7 discussions, really. I think that would be the only way we could kind of probably deal with it. So rather than opening it up to a full review, so I think we would always accept issues on any topic, but I think it's more that we would say we would only reconcile the ones that we consider in scope. Yeah.
So in that case, then priority of better comment disposition will be to those that are in scope and any others. So they will be prioritized accordingly. Yep.
Yeah, and for this discussion too, like I think we can work on exactly how we're going to deal with that down the track. So this is really just that we'll get listed as a spec that's going to ballot at this point, and make sure that we can be listed.
Okay.
We
Sounds
can
good.
decide to pull it if we decide not to do it as well. So that's always
Right.
an option. Yeah.
All right. Any further
That's it.
questions before we entertain the motion? All right. If not, then Brett, you are free to make a motion.
I would just like to make a motion that we accept a 6.1.0 AU base ballot for the March ballot period 2026.
All right. Anyone who would kindly second the motion?
Richard.
Thank you, Richard. Any further questions and discussions on the motion? All right, hearing none.
My hand's up,
hang on.
Stephen.
Oh, okay. I didn't see your hand until now. All right. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to better understand what if available means here. Because AUTHO can't become available without changes to AU base, i.e. the removal of the terminology artifact. So that's kind of cyclical. Can we be a little bit more clear on that?
Well, I need someone to set up a THO and implement it.
Okay, so it's just really the creation of the IG. So if we could,
yeah. So because we can't, we can remove the terminology once there's a THO artifact.
yeah. Okay,
Yeah,
so
yeah,
maybe
yeah.
if I could, as a friendly amendment, suggest to replace the words "if available," subject to creation of the AUTHO IG.
I don't think it's part of my motion. So because really I just
Oh,
want to say our intent.
sorry.
Yeah. So it's just I think we just want to say we do intend to ballot, and I'm happy that we work on the criteria of inclusion
Sorry, I
later,
read those
which we
bullet
can.
points as the scope
Yeah.
of the intent to
No,
ballot. Okay, that's fine then. Thanks, Brett.
no. Yeah, cool. Yeah, it's not actually in the intent. It's just an intent to ballot rather than any particular scope.
All right, okay.
That is the
Gotcha.
premise. That is the premise for the
All
ballot.
right,
Yeah.
with that settled, then Brett, please launch the vote.
All right. Let me try and do that. Relaunch. Here we go. There you go.
While we're voting, I have a question about a THO. Is the idea that all
Richard,
terminology would
can
move
we
to...
hold off the question until we
Sure.
finish the vote because that's not related to the vote? Thank you. All right, I have 7 affirmative. I assume plus Brett, that will be 8, and I have no abstain. So therefore, motion carried. All right.
Thank
Okay,
you.
Richard. All right.
Oh, yeah.
You
Yes. Sorry for jumping ahead. Is the idea that THO will initially take all terminology from the AU base, or that it will take a subset of the terminology?
To be determined.
Yeah.
So it might be a subset, or it might be all of it.
Yeah.
But it doesn't have to be all of it.
No.
Thank you.
all right?
I think there'll be some sound arguments for keeping some things. Thanks.
All right, with that sort of done, Heath, we have about 2-3 minutes. If you want to jump into it, happy for you to share your screen.
Yeah, I think it's almost leading on to what we've just started talking about with THO, and I guess that the quick context here is patient summary requires a new value set to try and get this. Yeah, hopefully you can see. No, I need to press another button. You can see my browser. We need to get a new value set to include a concept of no known current medicines alongside of the existing value set items already defined in NCTS. And yes, I did say that acronym correct. So I briefly mentioned this last meeting, and Ruben brought up an interesting point about why do we need to go to NCTS to get a new value set? Why can't we do it in HL7 Australia ROGs? So maybe just in the last couple of minutes, it's probably a longer conversation than 5 minutes, but it might help the next conversation around this and the actual process on how do we actually get what we need to do, which is a new value set. And I don't know, understand the process around how things get done in NCTS. So I'm looking at the pros and cons, but I had been given this impression that anything that was SNOMED or a value set using SNOMED codes had to be in NCTS. That was just some agreement that we had here in Australia. But Ruben, you've kind of alluded to perhaps that's not an absolute done deal. So open it up for discussion around that. If you need more context, that's fine. But really what I'm looking for is a new value set at AU base level that adds an extra concept from SNOMED to an existing value set from AMT.
I think we need a proposal on how HL7 wants NCTS to play with the new THO and terminology elsewhere in HL7 Australia stuff. And I agree we're not going to do that in 5 minutes.
What I would say is that there is no agreement that I'm aware of that says value sets with SNOMED concepts must be in the NCTS.
I don't want to name names, but
my point's not about where it has to be, but that we should work out what HL7, that somebody should work out what is HL7 Australia's position on a nice piece of architecture or a nice geography for the way these sorts of things sit in the Australian environment. And then we're going to have to negotiate that with the agency, and they'll have eventually come to some position on that and go from there. So I think somebody needs to come up with an idea on what's a useful geography for things like NCTS and THO and other HL7 terminology in Australia. And I think that needs to be, in a sense, an outline, and then that can be fleshed out into agreements that people may or may not subscribe to, but at least we've got an idea of our preferred geography.
So just for my sake, agency currently governs the value sets in NCTS. Is that correct?
Yep. Well, put it this way, if the NCTS is a national digital health platform, it hosts a number of terminology artifacts and terminologies. Some of them are IP that the agency owns. Some of them are IP that AHW owns. Some of them are RACP. And I don't know yet whether there's anything from HL7 Australia in there, but there's certainly a few things from HL7 International in there as well. So the things we're talking about here, the value sets, that's HL7 Australia IP.
So, but you're talking about hosting, so that's the service. That's one thing.
That's part of the
other
service,
thing
yes.
is who governs these value sets. So when I want another value set, who am I actually requesting the new value set of?
So here's where ownership comes into play. If this is an agency value set, i.e. it has a URI of healthterminologies.gov.au, then you'd request that of the agency.
And I think that's what we're
that goes
looking
for SNOMED reference sets as well.
Because at the moment,
But
the
I mean,
medication value set is a agency value set. It's a health
mhm.
terminal, and we're looking just to extend on that.
Yeah.
So for me, it would make logical sense for it to also be managed by the agency in that same domain, rather than HL7 coming across over the top and saying, "Oh, we're gonna make it a HL7 value set, HL7 Australia value set." But we're
So
going to leverage the agency one, and we're going to add another one that comes from SNOMED.
It looks
so
like that this is going to be a longer discussion. We're at time, so I think we need to wrap up this conversation. I'll let Ruben sort of 1 more minute to express what you need and then what you want to say, and then we'll wrap up and we will have to defer further discussion till the next meeting.
yeah, I just want to agree with Heath that does make sense, but it does hinge very heavily on an agreement between the agency and its management of that value set and HL7 Australia to ensure that no untoward changes to the value set are made independent of HL7 Australia, which could impact on our use of it. And I don't believe an agreement around that has been forged yet.
There has been agreements in the past, but I don't think it's been documented. So
Yep.
yeah. So I think we need to have one for sure.
And maybe that's where that position that I had heard has come from, as more of an undocumented agreement.
All right,
It's
we are
just
now.
it's just the impact, right? If you change the value sets and there's an impact on the users of the value set, so we either need version management or something to ensure that that's not going to cause a problem. And like if we're kind of yeah, that's the main thing. It's
All right, we are
it's just
absolutely
can't
at time,
change all the
and
time.
we'll continue the conversation
Yep.
next meeting. All right, thank you, everyone. Brett, can you
Bye.
please stop the recording?
Certainly can. Thank you, everyone.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks all. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Ms. Rubin dropped.